Welcome to the Deep Dive. If you've been watching the business landscape over the last few years, you've probably felt this strange discomfort,
hmm
a nagging question that, traditional business analysis just can't seem to answer. Our mission today is to try and decode that feeling.
Right. It's the phenomenon where you see two companies and they're operating in the exact same market using very similar strategies, comparable scale even.
Yeah, they look the same on paper.
They look the same, and yet just a few years later, their revenue trajectories are, well, they're radically different.
One seems to quietly stall out, maybe even disappear,
And
while the other suddenly seems to jump onto this exponential curve.
exactly.
We used to be able to point to, I don't know, a big merger or some genius marketing campaign to explain it. But now, the standard tools,
The old playbook.
right, reviewing quarterly profits, analyzing KPIs, even reading their big digital transformation roadmaps, they just don't seem to explain these massive divergences anymore.
They don't. And that's because those tools, they only give us the result. We're seeing a major gap between the stated strategy and what actually happens.
Okay.
To understand that divergence, we have to look deeper, beneath the surface metrics, to find what truly predetermines the curve of that success or failure.
I understand the instinct to look deeper, but let me just challenge that for a moment. Isn't this just a sophisticated way of describing old-fashioned organizational inertia?
That's a fair question.
Companies have always struggled to execute on big ideas. How does this structural layer fundamentally change how we analyze the problem?
It changes the analysis because
Yeah.
we are looking at the nature of the structure itself, not just the inertia within it. A strategy can be changed quickly.
Sure, you announce a pivot.
You announce a pivot, a new product line, that's a high-level choice. But the underlying structure, what we're calling the enterprise operating system, or EO, that is layered, it's fixed, and it is extremely resistant to change.
So the strategy could be absolutely brilliant, but if the foundational structure of the company is non-compliant, it just can't take hold.
It can.
It's like installing the latest, most demanding software on a computer from 10 years ago.
That's a great analogy. It just won't run. The EO is composed of these deeply embedded elements that have sort of fixed over time.
Like what?
The deep organizational design, established operational processes, investment habits, and, this is critical, how the company structurally manages risk and compliance.
That reframes the entire goal of leadership then. It means the critical factor isn't setting an aggressive growth strategy.
No, that's easy to write down.
The critical factor is understanding the internal system that actually defines the company's maximum growth limit.
Absolutely. If that underlying OS is rigid or weak or misaligned, it sets a hard ceiling. No amount of top-level strategy or investment can break through that operational ceiling.
The strategic choice is basically nullified.
It's nullified by the reality of the internal operating system.
Okay, so if we accept that this enterprise OS is the hidden engine determining fate, and we've established it's much more than just IT software, we need to know, what exactly is this system?
Right.
What are the core components that make up this foundational structure?
The enterprise OS is exactly that, an enterprise-specific operating system. It's the foundational structure that integrates 5 core components.
5.
And in doing so, it defines how the corporation handles stress and processes friction. The key is that the combination of these 5 elements is unique to every single company.
And that combination determines the ultimate
ship of revenue.
Okay, let's break down those 5 components.
They are entirely structural. So
Yeah.
first you have supply. That means the entire supply chain, the sourcing architecture.
Got it.
Second is operations, the day-to-day mechanisms, the physical processes. Third, labor, or what you could call the human OS talent training deployment philosophy. Fourth is the role of automation and AI, integrated tools and systems. And finally, number 5 is regulatory handling.
Regulatory handling. That sounds a little technical. When you talk about the regulatory component, are you just talking about simple compliance?
No, it goes much, much deeper than standard compliance. It involves what some analysts call the company's regulatory distance.
Regulatory distance.
It's a structural choice. How far do you position yourself from mandated standards? Are you proactive, building systems that anticipate future global regulation, or are you purely reactive?
Just scrambling to meet the bare minimum.
Exactly, scrambling to meet today's local rules. That structural decision is baked into the OS, and it costs money every single day.
So those 5 components, supply, ops, labor, automation, and regulation, are fused together to form this highly specific operational entity.
Correct.
And you said this system fundamentally defines how the company processes friction. Can you elaborate on that?
That is its defining characteristic. Every day, the enterprise faces friction delays, compliance hurdles, cost increases,
Labor disputes.
labor disputes, all of it. The OS makes a fundamental judgment on how to deal with that friction.
What are the options?
The OS decides which friction points it will absorb internally, meaning costs the company bears directly to keep things smooth, and which friction points it will externalize.
Externalize. So pushing those costs onto the customer.
Pushing them onto the customer, the market, or even society.
Can you give us a quick, concrete example of that distinction?
Certainly. Think about logistics and last-mile delivery. A company whose OS chooses to absorb friction might invest heavily in its own state-of-the-art warehouses.
Right.
Highly paid, trained in-house drivers, redundant inventory systems. They bear that high internal cost, but the customer gets a nearly frictionless, fast delivery.
They're sacrificing margin today for loyalty tomorrow.
Exactly. They are. Now, the opposite, externalization.
What does that look like?
A company whose OS externalizes friction might use gig economy labor, minimal inventory buffers, lean IT systems. Their internal costs are lower today. But the customer experiences the delays, the poor communication, the inconsistent service. The customer is effectively paying the hidden cost of the company's operating system.
I see.
The EO is not just an efficiency tool. It's the core structure that determines whether the enterprise can truly achieve exponential scale. All the DX and AI stuff, that's just a tool sitting on top of that foundational decision.
That makes the distinction crystal clear. So
Yep.
now let's look outward. If that's the internal engine, what happens when the road outside starts changing dramatically? We have massive external pressures, geopolitics, demographic shifts, climate regulation. How do these forces hit these internal, rigid systems?
This is where we introduce the external layers of pressure, the membranes. We identify two primary membranes.
So,
First, the life membrane. This includes immediate local dynamics, local labor availability, logistics infrastructure, urban structure, local regulations.
stuff right outside your door.
Exactly. Then second, the world membrane, which encapsulates slower-moving, broader pressures, global automation pressure, large-scale demographic constraints, geopolitical instability.
And global regulatory hardening, like net zero mandates.
Right. All of that. It sounds like an overwhelming set of incoming forces hitting the company constantly.
It does.
And it is. But here is the crucial insight. The pressure from these membranes, whether it manifests as shear, that's the velocity difference between the market and the slow internal structure, or calcification, the hardening or stiffness of the internal systems, that pressure is not applied uniformly across the market.
Okay. So the outside world changes for everyone. But how the company receives that change is what determines the outcome. The enterprise OS acts as a filter.
Precisely. The EO is the transference mechanism. The design of that operating system determines if external pressure is simply converted into an unavoidable cost.
Which leads to that quiet stalling you mentioned.
Quiet rupture and stalling, or if that same pressure is converted into a competitive advantage.
Can you elaborate on that conversion mechanism? That feels key.
Sure. Think about the looming global labor shortage. If a company has a highly human-dependent OS1 built on cheap, plentiful, easily replaced labor, when that shortage hits,
It's a direct hit.
it's a direct and immediate cost strike. That company now has to pay dramatically more for the same output, which erodes margins. That is pressure converted to cost.
But the competitor, who designed their OS differently, experiences something else.
Yes. If their competitor had an OS optimized for flexibility, high-end automation, and efficient integration of digital labor, the labor shortage doesn't hit them as hard.
In fact,
As their competitor struggles to staff and pays higher wages, their relative cost structure improves. They start taking market share. The external pressure is converted into a competitive advantage and thus into profit.
so the core thesis is that corporate growth potential is now determined by the degree of compatibility between the company's OS and these external membranes.
That's it, exactly.
This raises a really important question, though, about timing. If the OS compatibility is so critical, why does the difference take years to show up?
Right.
Why does success often look like a sudden unexpected jump or failure look like a sudden stall? It's not a slow decline.
What's fascinating here is that the EO's impact is inherently delayed. Financial indicators, P&L statements, they're backward-looking.
They report what already happened.
They report last quarter. The enterprise OS determines the future shape of the revenue curve, but the effects of its non-compatibility take time to accumulate and breach the surface. The company is accumulating silent internal friction long before it ever shows up on a balance sheet.
So there's a time gradient, a kind of delayed fuse. How does this divergence show up over time?
In the short term, say about 1 year, the difference is really subtle. The internal friction starts to seep out as small costs.
A few extra logistics expenses.
A few extra logistics expenses here, a slight increase in error rates there, maybe slightly higher personnel costs that management just dismisses as temporary inflation.
The company looks fundamentally sound on paper.
Absolutely. The external narrative is often still positive, but the quiet tax of incompatibility is being levied every single day.
The structural damage is occurring, but it's beneath the waterline.
Exactly. Then you hit the medium term, around 3 years out. This is the critical threshold. The OS non-compatibility reaches a point where the divergence becomes undeniable.
This is the branching point.
This is the moment of the victory-defeat branching among competitors. Company A, with a compatible OS, starts attracting better capital and talent because of its momentum. Meanwhile, Company B, burdened by friction, sees its growth curve flatten rapidly. The market finally sees that Company A is leaping ahead.
And that explains the sudden acceleration we often see. It feels like it comes out of nowhere.
Precisely. Then we move to the long term, 5 years or more. At this point, only companies with highly compatible, flexible OS structures show that genuine exponential growth.
And the non-compatible ones.
Non-compatible OS companies tend to either fade significantly, merge out of necessity, or they disappear entirely. To an external observer, it often looks like a sudden loss of momentum or a catastrophic failure.
Even though
the structural conditions for that failure were fixed in accumulating friction 5 years earlier.
So, to crystallize that thought, the strategy only utilizes the potential that the OS dictates. And the delay in divergence, that silent buildup of incompatibility, is why apparently robust companies suddenly lose momentum while unknown players hit escape velocity.
The enterprise OS is the future layer of revenue. It dictates whether changing world pressures are converted into profit or simply registered as unavoidable cost. That distinction is the key takeaway from this whole analysis.
That realization should completely shift how we analyze companies. We shouldn't be looking backward at their last quarter's P&L.
No.
We should be structurally evaluating their OS compatibility and the friction they're currently absorbing versus externalizing.
We now understand that the difference in corporate destiny is determined by the enterprise OS. But if the traditional financial indices fail to read that difference in advance, it forces us to ask the necessary next question.
Which is?
How does the difference in enterprise OS decide when revenue diverges, and along what kind of curve? Is the divergence exponential? Is it linear? Or is the eventual failure a sudden nonlinear collapse?
Understanding that structural timing mechanism.
That's the next layer of this deep dive.
A fascinating structural view to leave everyone with. Thank you for guiding us through this.
Always a pleasure.